Welcome to Off Hours, a conversation between John Edwards and Chris Manning.
This last episode, we touched on Dufour's 20th anniversary Simplicity edition that was sold at auction, and there were an additional number of them to be sold to, one country for each of the remaining pieces. As of the time that the episode actually went live 2 weeks ago, over 10,000 people had put their names on the list for fewer than 20 watches. So they've actually revised the plan somewhat since then. And they are going to continue forth with the one per country. That's just for approximately half of those pieces. And then for the final 10, it is actually going to be by lottery. Because I imagine that the 10,000 number has probably only gone up in the last fortnight.
So your name's not likely to be pulled up then out of the 10. Is that what you're saying?
I didn't bother submitting my name.
Oh, you didn't put your name in?
I don't have the liquid assets needed to pick this particular piece up.
I'm not surprised that they've had to change it up a little bit. It was commendable what they were doing with it, but I think it was just impractical considering the number of people that they were getting. I don't know if he thought that maybe they were only going to get one person from or two people from certain countries, but yeah, that's just impractical. And 10,000, that's impressive. I would not have expected 10,000 people to be able to, to be able to have the funds to do it and have the interest in doing it, right? Just because you've got watch collectors who are regularly spending that kind of money on watches doesn't mean that they have any interest in independent watches. Mm-hmm. And so it really is an interesting confluence of people who are interested in watches, interested in independent makers, and have the money to be able to buy something like this. So it was 10,000 people is a lot more than I expected. Now, you and I both caught Seth Kennedy's In Conversation talk with Isabel this afternoon. What did you think about that?
This is Isabel from Rue Pigalle, and she tends to interview a lot of artists and niche artisans from around the world. And she dropped in on the workshop of Seth Kennedy, an antiquarian horologist who we've mentioned here on the show before. And in fact, we pointed out this very Zoom call that would be coming up in our last episode for anyone who wanted to catch that. So I did indeed tune in. I wasn't able to catch every last moment of it. I just had it spinning in the background there and got a bit of a taste of my own medicine, and that I found it a little hard to hear Seth at times. He was so soft-spoken, especially in contrast to Isabel, who was quite a bit more boisterous.
Yes.
And lively on camera there. But it was great. It was really nice to see inside his new space there and his new studio he's recently moved into and is getting settled into. And a treat to see some of the pieces that he's been working on as well. Although a lot of them, I should actually say probably all of them, I have seen before because he has published them up online before. But it was neat to hear firsthand and see him firsthand live as he's describing a lot of them.
Yeah, I've been to Seth's workshop, his last workshop, but this is a new shop that I haven't actually seen myself yet. And I was hoping to have seen it this year, but of course, COVID and no ability to travel to the UK, which is unfortunate. So hopefully the next time I'm over in the UK, I'll be able to see it in person. But it was nice to get a quick tour of the shop and see what Seth's doing, because he's always doing fascinating work. And just the nature of what he's doing, working on individual pieces. Nothing that he's doing is the same from day to day. Even if he's making 7 cases or whatever in a year, none of those cases are going to be identical. They're all going to be for unique watches. So it's always nice to see what he's doing with that. And some of his designs are really great. The one that he had with where the watch itself could be flipped around in the pair case so that you could display either the dial or the movement from the back was a great idea. I really like the look of that. I think that's the most recent one that he's finished. And that looks gorgeous. It's the sort of thing I'd love to be able to see up close.
Yeah, I was really impressed by that one when he published photos of that just a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
There. It's a really unique design, and it's something I can't say I recall ever seeing done before.
No, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that, and it's quite innovative, and it's nice because the movement that was in there, that watch that was in there, I think he was saying that it was an orphaned movement that the owner had acquired at some point, and it's a gorgeous movement. So it was it's nice to be able to see that, and I guess it's sort of like the reverso idea, right? Like a lot of the reversos you can flip over, and some of them you can actually see into the movement from the back. So this is kind of a nod to that kind of a sort of a watch design. So it was nice seeing that in a nice large 18th century pocket watch.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting to see some of the questions coming through from our audience there as well.
Yeah.
One of them asked why it's called a fob watch
Uh-huh.
at some point there. And I was going to chime in, but my hands were otherwise occupied.
Yeah.
But the term fob is actually derived from an old German word for pocket. So like watch fobs and all these sorts of things. It's in some roundabout way over the centuries.
Yeah.
I think it's Fuppe or Fuppe in German.
And it is ironic that what we call pocket watches today did not start out as pocket watches.
No.
They were portable clocks, right? And because at the time people didn't have pockets. And so they couldn't have been called pocket watches at the time. And then eventually, as people, developed pockets in their clothing and in articles that they're carrying, they eventually became known as pocket watches. But originally, they were just portable clocks.
Well, as we touched on a number of shows back, they were actually called pomander watches when they first started out.
Yeah, in some cases, yeah.
So before they migrated to the pocket, they were pomander watches.
The etymology of some of these words is interesting, especially hundreds of years after they've, the original reason for the words the way they are have long sort of passed out of common usage. It's so it is kind of interesting when we see these, and it's just just like we call them watches now. They were wristlets at one point. They were a lot of different ways of wearing them, and that's changed the names that we've given them over the years. And some of them we've sort of retconned to the earlier versions of them, even though that's not how they were originally referring to them.
I don't know where they'll migrate to next. Maybe into a contact lens.
They call them phones now, John.
Oh, I see. So having seen Seth's previous shop and now had a virtual tour around his new digs, what did you think?
It's the shop that he's in is interesting. It's a sort of an artist collective which was created by a gentleman who I think he owns a fair bit of property in the area, and he had this large space that was unused. And so he basically modified this building to put multiple workshops in there. And he's encouraged artists who are doing fairly unique things to set up shop in this building. And so there are a number of really fascinating people that are in there. I know Seth has mentioned a couple of them to me. Like he's got a leather worker who's next door to him. And the idea was sort of an artist collective of niche skills. And Seth was I believe one of the first people that was sort of brought into that. And it's a great experience because of course you get access to a larger space than you might otherwise have available to you in London. And so it's sort of nice to be able to work in that. It's certainly less cramped than his previous quarters were, and it's nice to see. It's nice and bright, and it's got some sort of a good layout for what he's doing.
And he had laid out quite nicely too. The island area sort of in the middle there, and then various tools laid out all around the perimeter, and everything set up and just ready to go. Not having to pull out a tool and set it all up and being able to work frictionlessly like that, and just moving from one thing to the next.
Oh, it certainly makes a big difference. And in some in his larger lathe that he has that he does some of his tool making in, that was originally out in his shed in the backyard. Well, now he doesn't have to go out into the shed in order to work on it. And even then, the shed that it was in wasn't particularly large. The two of us in that shed basically consumed all of the free space that was in it. So this way, he doesn't have to do that. He doesn't have to go back and forth between the shop and the shed in order to do that. And yeah, it makes a big difference when you have enough space. All of a sudden, you have the ability to have a better workflow. That's something that I've certainly found here at the studio. Having significantly more space than I had before makes a huge difference when it comes to making things.
And yet, there never seems to be quite enough space.
There's never enough space. No, absolutely not. Tools, they expand to sort of conform to the space that's available to them. No matter how much space you have, it keeps expanding and expanding until you've run out of space again. So, yeah.
So you've just passed the 1 year mark now here in your new studio.
Yeah.
So what are some thoughts that you have reflecting back on this first year?
It is a bit crazy. We took possession of the keys, I guess, the 15th of November, 2019, and we're now into the first week of December of 2020, and it's crazy to think that we've been here for a year. And in some ways, it's amazing how little we've gotten accomplished. And in other ways, it's amazing just how much we've gotten accomplished in here. Certainly this building does not look anything like it did a year ago inside of here. Everything from the room that we're currently recording in, this recording pod that we have, to the actual shop floor itself and the gallery and everything. None of it is even remotely similar to what it looked like. Where we're sitting right now, there were racks and racks of tire storage, and it was a horrible sort of unused space that was not really usable for anything. And now it's a sort of a nice, comfortable space to work in. In fact, this is where I've got my watchmaking studio upstairs, and I spend a huge amount of time up here, and it's nice and comfortable. And anybody who was in here a year ago wouldn't recognize it today. So it really is amazing in a lot of ways how much we've been able to get done and how much we've been able to transform this building into a tool that allows us to do the things that we want to do.
Yeah, you certainly wouldn't have wanted to do any form of watch work
no
up here in this space the way that it looked a year ago.
Yeah.
I mean, there were ample voids and gaps in the floor and creaky floorboards to lose all manner of parts. Like, who cares about losing a watch part? You could have lost an entire watch. In some of those cracks.
Holes. Yeah, absolutely. It was ridiculous. It certainly wasn't usable the way that it was, but we've turned it into a nice, comfortable space now, and it's great having the space to be able to do things. Our shop floor, which used to be the garage space, there used to be 5 car lifts in there, and we tore most of those out, and we've put our heavy machinery in there, all of Rich's woodworking machinery in there, from his CNC router to his planer and everything like that. That's all down in there, and that's where all of my heavy machinery is. Right, that's where my large lathes are, my mills and things like that, my pantograph, all of that's down in that area. And that's something where we have certainly run out of space in that area. If we really want to bring anything new into that space, we're going to have to figure out what we want to get rid of or dramatically change the layout of that space. So in some ways that's a little frustrating, but it's also not unexpected. I think it's around 3,000 square feet in there, and consolidating both my shop and Rich's shop in there, as well as leaving enough open space to be able to do things like layout. We did leave one of the car lifts in there, and that allows us to do things like, I did an oil change on my car on the weekend, right, which is rather nice to be able to do. We're now deep in the throes of our winter, and I'm able to swap out the tires on my car easily in here, and so that's nice. But we've also got that space available to do fabrication. So that's where all of our welding setup is, and that's where our plasma cutter is and things like that. So we certainly have new tools and capabilities in this shop that we never had before. Rich's CNC router is now orders of magnitude larger than it used to be, right? He had I think it was set up as a 4x4 router in his basement before, and now it's 6x12 feet, right? It's absolutely massive. We also have things like a forklift in here to help us be able to move really heavy machinery and do that kind of, heavy lifting. Things that, we've got stuff now at a scale where moving it around is dangerous if you're not doing it properly. So having those tools around, they're really nice to haves, but they do take up space, and that's so we have certainly run out of space in that main shop area.
Yeah, for the new CNC machine you just finished, new gang tool CNC machine. I would love to know how you would have gotten the iron top for the table that machine is mounted on. How you would have gotten that onto the table without the forklift?
Brute force and ignorance, John. That's how I move everything in this place. So the CNC lathe that I'm building right now, this is a custom CNC lathe I designed and built a number of years ago, as I've mentioned before. It's based off of a design that Dan Simons showed me years ago that he had created for turning pens. So I've taken that idea and I've sort of run with it. It's a gang tool lathe. And my original design that was similar to this was mounted on a 1/2-inch sheet of aluminum, which I thought was going to be fine and wasn't really sturdy enough. I could watch the that 1/2-inch sheet of aluminum turn into a Pringle every time the drilling cycles would go into stainless steel or something. So I decided to mount it onto a large cast iron surface plate. So it's like a 40, I want to say it's like a 40 by 32 inch surface plate, cast iron. It weighs about 600 or 700 pounds, I think, somewhere around there. And then it's mounted on a steel table that I welded up for it. Yeah, I moved that. I mean, that was in my shop at home beforehand. So I had moved that surface plate around a number of times on my own. And honestly, leverage is your friend. It's amazing how much you can move with a good lever and some wood, right? You block out, you use blocks of wood to lift things up or to keep them up once you've lifted them. And it truly is amazing how much you can move by yourself with just the right lever and a few accessories to help you out.
Yeah, I recall you had put some eye bolts in there to help you move it around your old shop, but you didn't actually have it mounted on a table in the old shop. You were just
I hadn't.
Moving it to get it out of the way.
I hadn't actually mounted it on a table yet, and you're right but it's still something that I'd had to move around a number of times, and I had to get it into the shop and everything. So, when I bought it, it was easy. They loaded it into my trailer with a forklift at the shop, and then I got home, and you're like, how am I moving this? Anyways, honestly, it's a lot of very simple techniques that allow you to move heavy things around a shop safely. But you do have to think about it, and you have to be intentional about how you do it, and not just try and lift things up and move it around.
Yeah, I imagine you would have needed a very well reinforced 16-foot lever to lift that beast up onto that table.
No, actually, you can do it with a lot less. Like that Acier F5, which weighs significantly more than that. I mean, I moved that thing around with a lever that was maybe 3 feet long. It's amazing what you can do with leverage in the right place.
No, that must have had like some sort of hydraulic assistance.
No, not at all. Not at all.
But you didn't lift the Acier 5 up onto a table you had welded together.
No, but I still I lifted it up several inches to get it off the blocking that was there. I mean, at that point, it's academic how far you're moving it. The trick is that you need to be able to lift it. Once you can lift it, how far you're lifting it is unimportant, right? That just takes more blocking to lift it up. That's all you're doing. You just use blocks of wood to keep lifting it higher and higher. Right?
I read you now. Okay.
So
3-foot lever and a bunch of blocks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Just throw a few blocks at it. I still would have loved to watch you do that.
Oh, it would have
cheating
been
with the forklift.
Yeah. Well, yes, I have cheated with a forklift, and I also use the pallet jack to be able to move it around now that it's on the table. But you're right, it is a kind of cheating, basically doing it the way that I have done it.
So imagine 2020 is not shaped up to be the way anyone imagined it would first going into this year. So how's that been for you?
Well, I think the biggest thing from this point of view, from the shop and the studio that we're in, the biggest thing that has affected is the ability to have people here and be able to put on events here. One of the spaces that we have here is a nice gallery space. It's the old showroom that they had. This was for people who haven't listened to some of the past episodes, this building was a garage and in its last iteration, a tire center. So people they were selling various tires and fitting tires onto vehicles here. And that is, again, it's around a 3,000 square foot space, which is a large open room with glass windows on two sides. And we ripped out there was a small office at the back, and there was a customer service counter that was there. And so we ripped all that out, and we've turned it into a nice large open gallery. We've got a kitchen in there. We've got a projector in there. You and I were watching the SpaceX SN8 launch earlier when they if you haven't watched it yet, the spoiler alert, it blew up when it hit the pad. It sounds like they ran out of fuel. But anyways,
quite a thing to witness on a 24-foot screen.
Yeah, something like that. And that's the thing. We've got a huge projector on the wall, right? So we can actually see big stuff on there. We've got massive speakers in there, so we can actually blast things out if we want to. And oftentimes it's just it's our living room. We have some couches in there. We have lunch in there. We have a pool table in there, things like that. And that's great for us. But we wanted to be able to use that space as a gallery space as well. So I know a lot of people in the city who are artists. We wanted to be able to provide a space where the right artists could come in and be able to show off their work and be able to do that in a space where they weren't being charged exorbitant gallery fees, and they could set up and do things that they may not be allowed to do in other spaces. And that includes the stuff that we want to do, right? Both Rich and I have ideas for display pieces that are maybe larger than might be comfortable to put in another gallery, or we want to have it on permanent display. And so that gallery space is something that we can use for a lot of different things. We can also use it for events and talks and things like that, and be able to live stream lectures and whatever comes up. Like there are a lot of things that we could do with that space, which we just haven't been able to do because we can't have gatherings of people. And that's something that we're really missing out on, that would have changed the feel of this space dramatically. And I think that's the biggest loss that we've had in this space because of 2020.
I think as a result of that, I don't know if this would have all come about the same way anyway for you, but in some way there's been a lot more virtual gathering taking place in 2020 due to COVID-19. Mm-hmm. And we touched on video gear a little bit back when we recorded that Time for a Pint virtual get-together with Matt and Chris. But your setup has evolved significantly since then.
Yeah, I've wanted to document what I'm doing with video for a long time, and I should have started this years ago. And of course, perfection is the enemy of good enough, and it's meant that I'm years behind in where I should be in terms of getting video content out there. But it's something that I'm focusing on more and more. This is something that, as you and I have worked on bits and pieces of Project Minotaur, I've filmed little bits of it. I've also filmed parts of that journey on my own in more detail after when I've been here on my own, and it's something that I want to do more of. I also think that now that the world is getting more and more used to doing video conferencing and virtual events, things like the virtual Time for a Pint, I think that there is going to be more interest in seeing what people in different parts of the world are doing through video, and whether it's through just a regular live stream where I'm there by myself, or whether it's something where there's somebody who's interviewing me. And so I wanted to make sure that no matter what it was that I was doing, whether it's a YouTube video, whether it's an Instagram video, whether it's a Time for a Pint, I wanted to be able to have a better video setup than the average person does, so that it looks good and people can actually see what I'm doing, and it's not just it's not just my my bedroom or whatever that I'm shooting from. It's great that people are doing that, and I certainly don't want to discourage anybody from showing what they're doing on video just because they don't have a perfect setup. But I wanted to make sure that what I'm documenting for myself is excellent. And it's something that I've come to realize over the last 3 years with you and I recording like this, that having this record of what it is that we're doing is so important. 20 years ago, people were starting to blog, and that's how a lot of people were documenting their journey and whatever they were doing and putting it out into the world. And, podcasting has obviously been popular for a decade or more. And, it was very easy to get this out here and document what we're doing through spoken word. But that's not always appropriate. Both blogs and podcasts are great for certain things, but they're not good for showing off other things. And that's where a video really comes in. And frankly, there's no good reason today with the smartphones that we have and, the cameras that are out there. There's no good reason not to document what it is that we're doing. We can publish for free easily. And so I'm trying to do that more. And I want to get that out in the world.
Yeah. And as we've both articulated a number of times here in the past, this isn't an area that is as well covered in video form as it ought to be.
Yeah.
And it is an area and an art that very much needs to be documented in video, because there are things that you simply cannot convey through words and pictures alone, and certainly not through spoken word in anywhere near the same level of fidelity as you can with video. And we've both lamented that we really wish that the Time Eon Alliance would publish some of these videos that,
Mm-hmm.
that they've spoken of. But we've also recognized that
It's a huge amount of work.
yeah, absolutely.
It is a great medium. Video is a great medium for showing off some of these things. And as we've talked about, obviously learning in person is the ideal way of doing it, right? Sitting in front of somebody who's been doing this for years is the perfect way of doing it. When I went over to the BHI, I'd already played with servicing watches, and I had already done a lot of work disassembling watches and doing things to them. But, standing in front of John Murphy while he's manipulating parts with his tweezers, and you see somebody who's been doing this for 30 years, and you see the confidence that he has when he's working with these delicate parts, and the way that he's intentionally manipulating them, and the way that, just watching somebody put a balance back into a watch for the first time. You can't really convey in, written word or spoken word what it is that they're doing as they're doing that. And you just see, you watch him as he's putting it in, and he gives that little twist, just to sort of set the balance right and then put it back in. And those are things that you'll never notice unless you're either right there or you've got good video of what it is that they're doing. And that's so valuable. But unfortunately, we can't all be in front of masters, in person all the time, right? That's just not practical. There aren't enough of them. They're scattered around the world. There are too many of us. We're scattered around the world. And it's just not practical to get us all in the same room.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a nice way of bridging that gap a little bit. And instead of us needing to cover the basics when we're in a room with somebody like that, maybe now instead of that, we can say, all right, watch these videos, watch Christian's videos, for instance. He's got great videos on servicing, 6497 up on learnwatchmaking.com. Well, now that you know how to do that, and you've seen the basics of doing that, now when you go and you take a class with Christian, or you take a class with John Murphy, you're going to be able to ask more interesting questions. You're going to be able to get a lot more out of it because you've already covered the basics, thanks to those higher quality videos.
Yeah, just on that singular note of installing the balance and the balance cock and that slight twist of the wrist, that becomes like even more important when you're working on a coaxial watch, the way in which you do that and the manner in which that is done. And I don't know of a video of George Daniels installing or showing how to install the balance cock and the bridge on one of his coaxial watches.
Yeah.
I mean, if someone does know a video out there, please send it our way. I'd love to see it. But that is something that it is actually very easy to mess up. Thankfully, I have not done this. I've had proper training on coaxial servicing it and those timepieces. But I can't say with certainty whether I would have reinstalled that cock properly and gotten the balance in just right had I not had an expert looking over my shoulder the first time that I did that.
Sure. Absolutely. And those are things that you can't expect somebody with very little watch experience to go into a course like that about the coaxial and be able to get a meaningful amount out of it. But you went into that course having already had years and years of experience working on watches with normal balances in them, so that when you're sitting in front of an expert in that particular watch, you're going to get the most out of it that you can. And that's kind of what I'm hoping with these videos that I'm putting up. I'm certainly not trying to tell anybody that I'm a master at anything that I do. I'm better than the average Joe at it, but I'm not a master at any of this stuff. But hopefully people will learn enough of the basics of what I'm doing that when they do figure out, hey, I'm actually interested enough in this that I'm going to hunt down someone who is a master at this art. Then when they get to that point, they'll be able to say, oh yeah, I've seen somebody do that, and I've learned from somebody who knows more about it than I do. And now they're sitting down in front of a master and they can say, all right, we don't have to talk about the first, 80% of this. Let's just talk about the last 20%. And that's where hopefully these videos will help people.
Mm-hmm. And there's this old proverb that as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And I can think of a number of different examples and different areas where this sort of back and forth dialogue through video has taken place and has brought about a renaissance or just a burgeoning of creativity and skill development over a very short period of time from different people all over the planet. Now, one of the first and easiest that comes to mind for me is just like breakdancing. There are actual talks that have been given on this subject and papers that have been written. This is an area that has been studied just about like the exponential increase in skill and tricks that these people are able to perform. I mean, the same thing happened with skateboarding with the introduction of camcorders back in the 80s. Skateboarding went through an incredible period of creativity, and it's because normal, regular, everyday people were able to pick up a tool and capture something and then have that distributed. Yeah. And that leverage for distribution, that lever is effectively unlimited for anyone in this day and age with things like YouTube and Instagram and Vimeo and the like.
Yeah. One of the people we've spoken about a number of times on the show is Dean DK out of Sydney, Australia. He's an amateur watchmaker. He's building his own version of a 6497. And he took most of this year off, so he hasn't published a lot of videos this year. But he popped up again last week, and he started putting out videos again. And one of the interesting things he did was he did a live stream last week that I actually caught a little bit of, where he was doing some design work in Fusion 360. And he doesn't have a lot of experience with Fusion, and he was struggling with one of the things that was in there. And so, even though I was chatting with him a little bit in the live stream, because of the delay in the live stream, it's a little bit frustrating trying to deal with that. So, you know what, I knocked together a 15-minute video for him showing him a couple of key techniques in Fusion 360 that would be helpful specifically for him in working on a watch movement. They're the sorts of things that you pick up watching any one of 100 tutorials on design in Fusion 360, but sometimes it's nice to have somebody who's just like they're doing the same kind of work that you're doing, and they can show you, look, these are the 5 techniques that you want to know in Fusion 360, and this will get you, significantly further ahead than if you sit there struggling along and trying to figure it out. So yeah, it's great to be able to do that and be able to send Dean this custom video that says, hey, this is what you should be looking at. And hopefully that's something that he benefits from enough that he's then able to continue doing that work, and somebody else will learn from the tips that I've given him that he's now passing on to somebody else. And that's where the video thing is so great. And it's so powerful to be able to show somebody. I can actually show him the techniques on screen instead of having to try and explain it to him in text and, with a 2.5-minute delay.
I think one of the most poignant instances of this that I've seen captured from a live stream was with Julia Minamata. So it's relayed by Cable Sasser. But she is a graphic artist. She makes these 8-bit style assets for video games, and she does it in Photoshop.
Nice. And
she's been doing this for years in Photoshop. One thing that is a default setting in Photoshop is when you use the eraser tool, if you're not precisely 100% lined up over a pixel, it will anti-alias your eraser mark. So it will, take out 80% from one pixel and maybe another 10% from an adjoining pixel, and another 10% from an adjoining pixel.
Which is really frustrating when you're trying to be precise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she lamented about this while doing a live stream, showing people her workflow and her process. And someone piped up and said, well, if you just go and click this setting here in this dialogue, you can change it so it will just do it on the pixel that has the most coverage of your cursor at that point. And there are so many other tools in Photoshop that aren't set up that way, where you can go from sort of fuzzy approach to a pixel perfect approach. And she had no idea that this feature existed. And she literally breaks down in tears in this live stream.
Yeah.
Because this has such
an impact on what
an
she's
impact
doing.
On her workflow. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And she might have gone on years longer. She might never have learned that.
Sure.
If not for this live stream and putting herself out there and showing her work to the world and her process to the world. And then someone can come along and say, you're going to find it a lot easier if you just do this, check this one little box off.
Well, you and I had a bit of this when we were looking at one of my dial designs, and I had pulled up the dial design in Illustrator, and I was I had gone off and studiously built all of these guidelines out with manual lines that I had drawn. And, Illustrator has guidelines, but I've been used to them from the Photoshop world where the guidelines that you get are vertical and horizontal, and that's it. And then you said to me, well, why don't you just change the angle on the guidelines? And I'm like, you can't do that, because I was used to Photoshop where you can't do that.
Mm.
And yet here you are in Illustrator, and it's like, all of a sudden I've got guidelines that are set up for each of the hour markers on my watch dial, and it makes my life so much easier. And it's little things like that you only pick up through that dialogue. And, this, as you say, this live stream thing is a way of doing that. So I'm thinking at some point or another, I'm actually going to start doing live streams. I have no idea how many people are going to tune in. Maybe nobody will. I do find that trying to go back to a live stream later on is often pretty boring, because they're often, 3 hours of stuff, and it's not particularly exciting. I think taking that video and then editing it down to, sort of a relevant 5 or 10 minutes is worthwhile doing afterwards. But I think it would be interesting to sort of get a live stream going and see who shows up and see who talks about stuff, and say, oh, who's going to actually show up and tell me, hey, there's a better way of doing this.
But it only takes one person.
Yeah, exactly. So all that to say, yes, I've been spending a lot of time and energy thinking about my camera setup in here. I'm thinking about adding a second camera so that I can do that. I've got a little video switcher, which will allow me to actually have a few different views of what's going on and what I'm doing, and be able to show different views of what's happening on my bench. And then I'll be able to pull up that setup and move it down into the shop where I've got my engine turning equipment, and be able to show people, hey, this is what I'm doing with engine turning, and they can actually see it live as I'm doing it. Although a live stream may be a little too distracting for engine turning. We'll have to see. It may be one of those things where it's like, okay, I'm going to be engine turning. I'm going to completely ignore you, because if I try and pay attention to you, I'm going to screw up my engine turning. So we'll see how it works out. But certainly for the stuff that I'm doing here at the Watchmaker's Bench, I think I could pull off doing a live stream with that.
Do you mind if we dive into the weeds a little bit here?
Because not at all.
This has changed dramatically since you recorded that Time for a Pint
Yeah.
episode back in the summer. You have literally built for yourself a one-man film crew that can follow you around and pick up your voice wherever you are, and prompt you as to what you should be saying. Like, it is quite incredible what you have built over the span of just a few months.
I've seen a few different people's setups over the years. There are a bunch of YouTubers who have talked about this. Everybody talks about, it's not the gear, it's the story, it's it's what you're doing, it's what you're talking about. Absolutely. If you don't have an interesting story, then it doesn't really matter what gear you have. But sometimes the gear actually makes a difference. And it doesn't have to be crazy expensive stuff. A lot of what I've got going on in here now is not particularly expensive gear, but it's just using it in the right way. So a few people over the years have shown off sort of these custom studio rigs where it's on a little stand that they can roll around their studio or their house or wherever it is. And they've got everything that they need in place. They've got a light on there. They've got a camera. They've got, say an iPad or a computer or something to show what they're doing or what they're talking about, their notes. And they've got all these different setups for doing that. And so I decided to extrapolate from, sort of 3 or 4 different setups that I've seen. And I've modified some of the gear that I've got in order to handle that a little better. So one of the things that I've lamented over the years is having very boring static shots of what I'm doing. It's at some point it's not really all that interesting if you're always seeing the exact same shot of the work that you're doing, and it's not moving, and that's really difficult to change if you're there by yourself. You don't have a camera operator to help you out. And so it's difficult to add some dynamic movement to your video shots when you're doing this by yourself. So I've recently picked up a small slider, and that's great, because now all of a sudden I've got motion. I've got, let's say, 8 inches of travel of motion left to right of my camera, and all of a sudden, hey, that adds a little bit more interest and a little bit more curiosity to what's going on. But the problem there is that it doesn't stay looking at the thing that I want it to look at, right? If I'm looking at, let's say, the headstock of my lathe, I want the headstock of my lathe to be in the center of the shot all the time that it's actually, even though the camera's moving a little bit. So I've managed to rig up my DJI gimbal. This active track feature will allow you to follow an object in frame and keep track of where it is. And so the gimbal will then track it. And so now, as the camera's moving back and forth on the slider, the gimbal's on top of it, and it can then track the object that I've told it to. So I can keep the drill press in the center of frame, or the lathe, or whatever it happens to be. But now I'm getting a little bit of motion going, and so it's a little bit more interesting than what I was shooting before. So little things like that make a big difference when you're working and you're shooting stuff.
And a more recent acquisition is actually going to unlock your ability to actually look people in the eye when you're on a Zoom call.
Something that drives me crazy is when I'm talking to people on video calls is not actually looking at them, and it doesn't look like I'm looking at them. It looks like I'm looking off to the left or whatever. And we've all seen this and we've gotten used to it. Cameras are in the worst possible spot on phones and on iPads and laptops and things like that for looking interesting and interested on these calls. There's been a real renaissance of inexpensive video tools for YouTube creators over the last couple of years. It's one of the biggest benefits I think that we've seen is sort of a democratization of a lot of tools for creators who don't have huge amounts of money to do these setups. And one of them is with teleprompters. 10 years ago, a teleprompter, if you didn't make it yourself, it would have been a very expensive thing to be able to buy because they would have all been set up for professional studios. But now there are a lot of inexpensive teleprompters that are designed to work with things like iPads. You can get teleprompter software for your iPad, and then you just set it up, sort of a little fold-up teleprompter that you can put your iPad on, put the camera behind it, and now all of a sudden you've got access to your notes or your script or whatever it is that you're doing with this teleprompter. So I decided to take it a little step further, and instead of just having the iPad there sitting on there to be able to read off of, I've put a small field monitor for a camera on there. So it's a 9-inch field monitor, and they're typically used to be able to see better what you're shooting when you're actually out in the field. So you can, instead of just looking at the little viewfinder on the back of your camera, you can see on a larger screen what you're actually shooting and what you're seeing. And so I've put one there, and I've attached an HDMI switcher to it, so I can actually put multiple sources plugged into this field monitor. So one of the one of the sources can be my teleprompter software. Another one can be the camera that I'm looking into. So now all of a sudden I know if something is in frame when I'm showing something to the camera. I don't have to wonder, is this actually in frame? Is it in focus or anything like that? I can see it while I'm still looking at the camera because I'm seeing an image of me as I'm working with it. And then the other thing I can do is now I can actually project to my WebEx call or my GoToMeeting video call or my FaceTime call. I can have the image of the person that I'm speaking to, projected onto the teleprompter in front of me. And now I'm looking them in the eye. And it just so happens that right behind their eye is the lens of my camera. So it now looks like I'm actually looking at them and I'm engaged with what they're doing and saying. And it's a little bit more appealing. It's slightly nicer as I'm talking to them. And this will give me the option to do a lot of that, where I can actually flip around between different video sources and be able to still look at the camera and see what I want to see while I'm doing that.
Another thing that's changed as well for you is your mic setup. I noticed a little something new dangling down from the ceiling.
Yeah, I've had that mic for a while actually, and I've just never really taken advantage of it.
I've always seen the lapel mic.
Yeah, lapel mics are horrible. They pick up Okay, we're going to get a little nerdy about audio here. Different microphones have different pickup patterns in order to pick up sound in different ways. So the microphones that you and I are speaking into now are geared to be picking up right in front of them, and they tend to reject sound from behind them or from the sides. So the idea is that you're speaking directly into the microphone, but really this microphone needs to be few inches in front of your face. You don't want it to be much further than that. Lapel mics are really great because they can be on your, basically on your chest, and they will pick up your voice. But the problem is they're sort of trying to pick up everything all around them. And so they also pick up things like the sound of the heater that's on the other side of the room, or the road noise or whatever. So they're great in a lot of ways, but they pick up too much. So the answer to that is the shotgun mic. So it's a very, very directional microphone that you basically mount so that it's just out of the frame of your camera shot, and it's pointed down at the chest of the talent who's speaking, and it will then pick up the sound coming from them. If you've seen video of people on set on a movie set or whatever, you'll see, somebody standing off to the side, and they've got a long boom pole, and they've got a set of headphones on, and they're holding a microphone up above the actors, and they're pointing it down at them. That's exactly what's going on here. It's just I don't have somebody standing there with a pole holding it, so mine's clamped to the ceiling, and I can move it around and put it into the position so that I can get slightly better quality audio than I would be getting from just a lapel mic.
Yeah, so your boom operator is the ceiling.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
So how long will it be before you tie that into a Ronin 2 as well and have that on active track following you around?
Hopefully never. I don't think I need to do that for the audio. That's not too bad. I can stand in one spot and be able to get the audio staying pretty good from that one location. Certainly the new Ronin gimbal that's out is really appealing because they've got a new LiDAR sensor that's in it. So this LiDAR sensor will actually track how far away the object is that it's focused on, and it will actually change the focus of your camera based on that. So if you don't have autofocus on your camera, like my cameras in the shop don't actually have autofocus on them. So this would be a way of adding that too. So there's a couple of things in the new gimbals that they're kind of appealing, but that'll be I think a 2021 purchase. I don't think I'll be doing that just yet.
Yeah, I was really impressed by that gimbal when I saw a review of it, and the fact that you could bust out some vintage glass, and basically make it as good as, if not better than some of the most state-of-the-art autofocus systems in cameras, as in cinema cameras. Yeah, that is truly remarkable.
Yeah, the cameras that I'm shooting with are cinema cameras. They've got single autofocus, so you can press the button once and it'll autofocus, and that's great for doing your initial focus setup. But if you move at all, it's not going to continue tracking you, and that's fine. There are a lot of other advantages that these cameras bring, and I'm willing to give up on the autofocus because of that. But it would be nice to have autofocus. And some of my lenses are, they're old enough that they don't have autofocus capabilities with this particular camera, or they may have poor autofocus capabilities. And so that's one of the things that this setup can actually bring to you is a really, really interesting set of autofocus capabilities that you just couldn't get otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it worked incredibly well in low light as well.
Yeah, because it's using an infrared signal from the LiDAR, it can continue focusing in absolute blackness, which is really fascinating to me because most, in fact, as far as I know, all autofocus systems that are on modern cameras are using some kind of either contrast or phase detect autofocus or a combination of the two. So this is a really interesting way of doing it where you're not using the light that's actually hitting the camera sensor. You're using a whole other set of light that is being emitted from this LiDAR sensor, and it's non-visible. So you're going to get, you don't have to see it. You don't have to, you're not going to capture that on film. So it is interesting to see how it's working, and it's really cool to see some of the things that people are doing with it.
I was largely being facetious there, talking about putting the boom arm for your shotgun mic into a Ronin 2. But it is really nice to have that boom arm cantilever down from the ceiling. It's up out of the way. You don't even notice it's there when you're working on the lathe. And you also don't have to worry about cords coming out of you or dangling all over the place. I mean, the last thing you want is any sort of excess bit that can get caught while you're working on a machine like that. So it really is a nice setup you've got going on there. Yeah,
there's a few advantages. Obviously, it gets it out of the way. It gets it off the floor. I don't get vibrations through it, through the floor like I would if it was on a stand. It's another stand that I don't have to trip over. all those things. Same thing. My light. I've got a light that's mounted to the ceiling as well. Actually, I've got a few lights that are mounted to the ceiling, which allow me to, again, get lighting in the place that I need it to be, without needing to worry about tripping over a C stand or, a lighting stand of some sort or whatever. I do have a little bit of extra space in this watchmaking area, but it's not an infinite amount of space, and I want to be able to shoot in the space that I'm in. And so this is great. It really is opening up a lot of options for me. And one of the things we've talked about before is that if you want to make something like this, you want to do it regularly, it needs to be easy. You need to remove as much friction as possible. And so now it's all just set up permanently. I don't have to tear it down. Maybe if I want to shoot something down in the shop, I'll grab some specific bits of gear and I'll bring that down into the shop with me, specifically camera lenses, things like that. But I don't have to, pull everything out of a closet, set it all up, just to do a shot and then tear it all down again because I don't have the room to keep it there. It's nice to have all this set up and working all the time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that the only way you might be able to make it better on the camera front is to set up one of those multi-axis camera systems that can go pretty much anywhere in the space it wants to. Well, it's being tethered to the roof that I sent you a couple months back.
I have seen a couple of guys who have set up these industrial robots that are used for doing automation in machine shops, and they've actually set up cameras on these industrial robots, which is utterly ridiculous. It takes my gimbal idea and it adds 2 orders of magnitude to the cost of it. But it is fun to see what people are doing with some of these things when you get to an extreme. And as you said, that guy who did make the custom CNC robot for doing filming was just ridiculous. And hey, maybe that's where I go at some point. Rich and I have enough CNC bits and servos and CNC controllers sitting around the shop that aren't being used for anything that we could probably knock something together.
Just be able to get those nice Tony Stark glamour shots of you working away in your studio.
Exactly.
Now, on the actual tools front,
mm-hmm.
You've made a number of upgrades and acquisitions over the course of 2020 as well.
One of the nice things about having the space that we've got is that we've been able to add more tools that we haven't been able to have in the past. I mentioned, obviously, Rich's CNC router, being able to get it up to a size where now we can leave a full 4x8 sheet of material on the machine in place and then set up another job beside it. Right? It's ridiculous being able to do it. It's nice having that option. I've been able to add a fiber laser to the shop this year, which has been a huge advantage. I haven't really put it through its paces yet, and I haven't used it nearly as much as I probably should, but that adds a huge amount of capability to the shop that I didn't have otherwise. Pad printer, again, I haven't really had a chance to do much pad printing yet, but it's there and I've got the space to be able to use it and set it up and everything. My Formlabs printer, all of these things. It's nice to have all of these tools available. They're all sitting there ready to go. And when I need to experiment with something, I don't have to worry about dragging it out of storage and setting it up and taking something else out of the way. It's been really nice for that. And then probably the most significant in terms of what I've been using on a regular basis is that Aciera F5 that we picked up. That's been such a dream to have in the shop. I've had reasonable sized mills in the past. I've got a Hardinge mill that I like. It's a little tool room mill, very, very accurate, but it has a very restrictive work envelope. The F5 is such a dream to work on just because of the extra space that it has. So with making this, these upgrades and additions to the CNC lathe that I'm working on, being able to go over to the F5 and be able to work on all of the plates that I need to work on, no matter how large they are, that's been great. So yeah, having the space for that, we never would have been able to do that if we were still working out of our basements and garages, right? Rich and I just didn't have the space before to be able to do that. And having the space to be able to do that has been incredible. So I talk to people about the fact that this shop is a tool, and it really is. This studio is easily the most important tool that I have. And I could not be doing the things that I do today with the ease that I am today without this tool. There's certainly been delays with some of the things that I've been working on. We've talked about delays with some of my own watches, with suppliers being delayed and things like that. And obviously COVID has really put a massive brakes on some of my projects from various points of view. But this studio tool that I have will allow me to ramp back up to doing whatever it is that I need to do very, very quickly. I need to do some casting next week. Well, I don't have to worry about making space for casting. I've already got a space set up for doing all of that, right? And it doesn't impinge on my machining space. And it's not going to be a problem for my, jeweler's bench. All of those things before were problematic. And if I needed to do some casting, then I would have to move things out of the way to do that. I just don't have to worry about that anymore. So certainly this tool is the most important thing that I have right now. And in terms of making my life better for actually making things. And so 21 is going to be much better for me in terms of being able to actually get things out the door and being able to make things, just because now we've sort of finished the work on the shop for the most part. Now it's ready to go and we can really start putting it through its paces.
Mm-hmm. And there are a number of other tools, of course, that we've touched on over the course of this past year, things like the plasma cutter and the saw stop. And then I've added a number of other tools in addition to those as well, things like a new surface grinder and lots of little handy tools like a drill press. You can drag around anywhere you want and drop down on a table and have it magnetically affix to it.
Yeah.
And, bandsaw for cutting metal, another metal cutting saw, nice chopping blocks and grinders, all manner of different tools that you guys have added. We've also had a number of small hand tools that are handy for watchmaking in particular.
Yeah, I've added a bunch of little watchmaking tools over the year that have been great that I haven't had, again, I just haven't had the space for, right? Everything from my, my regless for, as a little drill jig. I've now been adding things like I was just showing you earlier before we were on air. I've just got a hammer hand piece for being able to do texture work on pieces. So now I can start to experiment with that kind of thing. The precision camera and drill press that I've got now, all of those are things that are really making a big difference in terms of being able to do watch work. The uprating tool that we've been using for doing some of our layout work on this new watch, all these things have been a real boon to some of the work that I'm doing.
Aside from the regless, which we've already touched on, I have to say the Cameron drill press is a tool I've very much impressed by the precision on. And this is a company I didn't know existed. Most watchmakers drills or drills that are made specifically for watchmakers are exorbitantly expensive. And, Bergeron kind of has the stranglehold on the supply side of things there. But Cameron's a little family-run operation down in California. The precision on these is rock solid, and the serviceability, you couldn't ask for better.
Absolutely. It has been such a revelation playing with one. I've known about them for a few years now. I've been reading about them because I've been looking for a precision drill press for a bunch of years. And there are less expensive ones out there. There are significantly more expensive ones that are out there. I've been sort of living with using my Hardinge mill as an advanced drill press. But the big problem with that is that when you get into tiny holes, you really need to get the drill bit going at a high RPM. And my Hardinge just can't do that. It's not, it's not designed for that. It's designed to get up to about 3,000 RPM, and that's where it tops out. With some of these small drills that we're using, you really need to be pushing them beyond 10,000 RPM. And so a precision drill press like this is really beneficial. Fortunately, as I mentioned on a previous episode, one of the local tool guys that I know who also, has a lot of watchmaking tools and everything, he had this Cameron drill press that he was willing to loan us for a couple of weeks so that I could get a chance to actually play with one and see, is this something that I want to invest my money in? And after a single afternoon with this drill press, I immediately started looking out for one and buying one. And so I ended up buying a used one off of eBay. And one of the reasons why I was happy to buy it off of eBay used was that it is so easy to service these. Cameron themselves are happy to sell you the parts to refurbish any of their drill presses, whether it's in current production or not, because so much of it has really not changed. The critical things haven't changed over the years. So the spindles that they're making, you know, you can just drop them into any of their drill presses they've made since the 60s, as far as I know, and the current spindles work just fine. You know, all of these things, you want to get a variable speed controller for the motor, like the one that I bought from eBay doesn't have the variable speed controller with it. I can just order that from Cameron, and they're happy to ship that up to me. So I've been very, very pleased with it. When I posted that on Instagram, within a few hours, I had several people who had commented on that Instagram post talking about how they own several Camerons and they would never buy anything else. So that Cameron drill press has really been a revelation for me.
Yeah, what really sold me on it was seeing how much more accurately it drilled the holes than drilling them on your lathe using that centering tool, using the wobble stick. The wobble stick is great. The wobble stick's not the issue. It was the offset of the drill.
Yeah, so something that I need to address on my Derbyshire lathe is that I think that the tailstock is out ever so slightly, and it's offset ever so slightly. So I think I need to address that, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're having problems. But when we drilled that 1.1 millimeter hole on the Derbyshire, we then took some gauge pins and put them into the hole, and it was larger than what we had drilled, and we expected that. When we then drilled out the same kinds of holes in the exact same material using the Cameron, and we had made some pins which we were going to reuse, and we couldn't reuse them because we had made them for those larger holes that had come out on the Derbyshire. They were just too big for the holes that we had drilled on the Cameron, because when we used the gauge pins, they were exactly 1.1 millimeter holes. And that was truly impressive when you consider that the Derbyshire is no slouch in terms of being able to drill precision holes. But it was just, the setup of it is off a little bit. So also the low RPMs on the Derbyshire don't help when it comes to drilling out these holes. So I'm very, very happy with the results that we're getting out of the Cameron. And I could not recommend these drill presses anywhere near enough. They are just brilliant machines.
Yeah, the only reason I was bringing up the wobble stick, it was not to point out that was in any way the problem, but rather that you couldn't have gotten the position that we wanted those holes to be in any more perfect than we did using that wobble stick. They were dialed in.
Oh yeah,
precisely.
Yeah,
and yet
the holes were oversized.
And using the Cameron freehand.
Yes.
We were able to get more accurate holes out of that than with the Derbyshire.
Well, that's the other thing, is that because you're freehanding the plate and you're putting it into position manually, and then setting, getting the drill press going and drilling, I was able to drill out 2 bridge plates in the time that it took you and me to drill out 3 holes on one of them. Like we're talking, I think there was about 24 holes that I drilled out, and it took me very little time compared to the setup on the lathe, where you have to set up each hole, get the wobble stick, set up and center and everything. It obviously it's the way to go for ultimate precision of where that hole is located, but these are really close to where they need to be located. Certainly close enough for what we're doing, and frankly the speed was just amazing. It was so much faster to work with.
Yeah, for something like a jewel hole, I would still go the wobble stick route. But for the pins and the screw holes, this was magnificent.
And I think even with the jewel holes, it would be fine to do the initial drill out with the Cameron, and then do your ultimate precision centering on the lathe with the wobble stick, and then you bore them out to the proper size. And that way you've got the advantages of both worlds, because you do need to do an initial drilling of that hole before you can go in there with the boring bar. So I think that it would probably be faster to just drill it out, do that initial hole, that 1.1 millimeter hole, let's say, on the Cameron, and then center it up properly based on the other jewel that you're referencing with the wobble stick on the lathe, and then bore it out to the right size. And that way you're not worrying about the concentricity of the hole because of a drill bit. You're not worrying about if there's a little bit of, a little bit of run out on the drill bit or anything like that. That way you're getting it absolutely perfect because you're boring it through through a boring bar. And again, all of these things, where people are listening to us talk about this, all of these things are so much easier to show on video, which is why I want to be able to show this stuff off.
To be fair as well, we're literally complaining about hundredths of a millimeter.
Yeah,
So...
I know. We're talking about microns here, but still, it's if we're going to do this, we may as well do it right.
Yeah. But it is truly remarkable, the time savings and the precision of the camera. So I can't speak highly enough about them.
Yeah, certainly if you're out there in the world and you're looking at these, they come up on eBay regularly in good condition. I think there were 2 of them that were on eBay at the time that I bought mine, and they do come up regularly. But honestly, even if you don't get one off of, you don't get one used and you don't find a good deal on one, you can get them from Cameron for a very reasonable price. Like their setup is not astronomically expensive. They're not like some of the other precision drill presses that are out there where you're spending $5,000-$6,000 or more on a drill press. For sort of $1,500, you can get yourself a very, very precise drill press that you will be happy with.
So one last note with respect to the studio that I'd love to wrap the show up on is the sign out front. You guys, you finally have a sign. You're done masquerading as a tire change operation.
Yeah, we haven't had nearly as many people asking to have tires repaired as we did before we changed out the sign.
There's a really lovely article done up about the sign there outside the studio recently that I quite enjoyed seeing, and I know a number of other people have not only enjoyed reading that article, but have truly enjoyed driving by the studio over the course of 2020. I think you and Rich have shone a light into the darkness of 2020 thanks to the sign that you guys have out there.
Yeah, what John is talking about is the tire center that was here before had their sign with, GCR up top, which was the name of the company, and then they had, Firestone tires, advertised or whatever. And then below that, they have that typical sign that you see where you can change out the letters on the sign manually and you can put up, whatever wording you want. And you've got 4 lines of text or whatever you can put up there. And we decided that we wanted to start playing around with that and putting some stuff up. And I say we, I mean, really Rich is the driving force behind this. He's the mad genius behind a lot of our signs. And while I certainly have input into it, he really is the brains behind that. And it has really kept our sanity over the course of 2020, being able to put up weird and wonderful sayings on the side of one of the busiest roads in Ottawa. Some of them are things that everybody will appreciate and, it will be, be able to sort of understand the references for. Some of them are inside jokes. Some of them are so completely obscure that nobody else will ever get them. But it makes people think when they drive by, and they, makes people laugh. And we've gotten stories, for, as I said, this, Apartment 613 story that was done on Rich and what he's doing here. Talked a lot about the signs, and that's what the author was originally attracted to, was the signs that we're putting up. There are people who've certainly enjoyed what we're doing with them and trying to figure out what exactly it is that we're talking about sometimes and what's going on, or just having a good laugh.
And your sign wasn't even lit all year, but it is lit up nice and bright now. You got some new bulbs in there, some new wiring run. You've got the brand new signage all done there, and it is shining like a true beacon. But even before it was physically lit up, I think the two of you really did light up a lot of lives over this course of these past 12 months.
Yeah, it's been fun to do, and if you're interested in following along, I mean, obviously you can come to Ottawa and you can drive down Carling Avenue, and you'll see our sign as you drive by. But for those of you who it's obviously not practical for you to drive by our studio on a weekly basis in Ottawa to see what we put up. If you follow Lowen.design, Rich's Instagram account, he does put up photos of the latest sign whenever it goes up, and you can comment on that and see what's going on, and hopefully you'll get most of the references. Sometimes you won't. Actually, I guarantee you that you won't a lot of times. Some of them are truly bizarre. There have been a few where I've looked at Rich and go, what the hell are you doing? What are you talking about? But Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's sort of funny because when we were looking at this space originally, we looked at each other and we're like, how ridiculous would it be to be able to just post whatever we want on the side of a road? Because everybody who puts up a sign on the side of a road, it's like, oh, here, get your eyebrows waxed, or get your tires changed, or here's the latest special on our menu. And this has nothing to do with that. We're not trying to sell you anything. We're just trying to make you think.
Bring a little extra joy into the world.
Yes, exactly.
I know for a fact that that sign is, lit a smile up on my face on more than one occasion and sparked a bit of joy in my own life. So thank you both for that.
Thanks for listening to Off Hours. You can find detailed show notes at offhours.show. If you'd like to keep up to date with the show, follow us on Twitter @offhours. John can be found on Twitter @UnderTheLoop, and Chris can be found on Twitter and Instagram @silver_hand.